The moment Alessandra Moretti stepped into Lito Noir, the room didn't just quiet down. It locked up. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Every glass froze halfway to lips. This was the man who owned the skyline, the docks, the unions, and the fear of New York itself. But it wasn't him who made the fatal mistake that night. It was the woman on his arm. She laughed at the waitress. And she had no idea that the quiet girl standing beside their table carried a secret powerful enough to reduce their empire to ash. Because when Sophie finally spoke, she didn't stumble over French words. She silenced the devil himself. This is the story of how one careless insult and a single glass of red wine changed the underworld forever. Outside, Manhattan was drowning in rain. Not the kind that cleans, but the kind that slicks the pavement and makes every shadow darker. Inside Lito Noir, the weather didn't matter. The air was thick with truffle oil, polished wood, old money, and fear carefully disguised as etiquette. At table 4, Sophie adjusted the silverware with delicate precision, her fingers trembling just enough to notice. It wasn't the cold. It was hunger. She hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. Just stale baguettes the sous chef, Jean-Luc, quietly tossed out the back door after midnight. Survival food. Shame food. To the regulars, Sophie was invisible. A blur of black fabric and a white apron. Furniture with a notepad. Check your reflection, hissed Ms. Lauren, the maitre d', gliding past like a shark in polished shoes. Table 4 is reserved. The Moretti party. The name alone dropped the temperature in the room. Sophie's spine stiffened. Everyone in New York knew the Morettis. They didn't just control the docks or the unions anymore. They controlled outcomes. And Alessandro Moretti, the youngest and most ruthless don of the family, was known for 2 things. His terrifying silence and his obsession with perfection. "I'm ready, monsieur," Sophie murmured, too. King a loose strand of honey blonde hair behind her ear. She kept her eyes lowered. That was the rule. Look down. Stay alive. At exactly 8 p.m., the heavy oak doors swung open. The restaurant, usually a soft hum of crystal and whispered wealth, went dead silent. It felt as if the oxygen had been pulled straight from the room. Alessandro Moretti entered first. He was taller than the paparazzi photos suggested, dressed in a charcoal bespoke suit that likely cost more than Sophie had earned in her entire life. His face was carved into bored indifference, his jaw sharp, his eyes dark and calculating, completely empty of warmth. 2 bodyguards followed, massive and expressionless, like stone statues brought to life. And then there was the woman. She was beautiful the way a diamond is beautiful, cold, flawless, and meant to be displayed. Her red dress clung to her like a second skin. Camilla Russo. A socialite. A climber. A woman racing the clock to secure a ring before the next fiscal quarter ended. "This way, senor," Lawrence said, bowing so low his nose nearly brushed the carpet. They were seated at table 4. Sophie's table. She waited the required 30 seconds before approaching, her heart slamming against her ribs. She needed this shift. Needed the tips. Her rent was 3 weeks late, and her landlord, a sweaty man named Mr. Henderson, had threatened to change the locks by Friday. "Good evening," Sophie said softly. "Water for the table." Alessandra didn't look up. He was checking his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe. He waved a dismissive hand. Camilla, however, lifted her head. Her eyes scanned Sophie from scuffed shoes to frayed collar, lips curling with immediate disdain. To Camilla, Sophie wasn't human. She was competition for Alessandra's attention. Sparkling, Camilla snapped. "And bring the wine list. The reserve list. Not the house garbage." "Of course, madam." Sophie retrieved the heavy leather-bound menu and placed it gently in front of Alessandra. "Hign. Order it." "Read it for me, darling," he said to Camilla, his low, gravel-rough voice vibrating straight through Sophie's chest. "I have a headache." Camilla preened, opening the book. Her manicured nails tapped against the parchment as her eyes scanned the page. Then her smile faltered. The wine list at Lito Noir wasn't just French. It was archaic, pretentious, handwritten cursive detailing vintages and regions that required a sommelier's certification to understand. Camila squinted. Flipped a page. Then another. She laughed, thin and nervous. Well, she giggled, tossing her hair, it's all just French, isn't it? Alessandro, why don't we just order the Cabernet? I don't want a Cabernet, Alessandro said, finally lifting his gaze. His eyes locked onto her. I want the 82 Bordeaux. Find it. Panic flashed across Camila's face. She stabbed a finger at a random line. Here. This one. Sophie leaned in to pour the water. Her eyes flicked, just for a second, to where Camila was pointing. It wasn't a Bordeaux. It was a cheap Loire Valley table wine marked up for tourists. Actually, Camila snapped her head toward her, catching the glance. Embarrassment burned across her face, and she needed a target. Why don't you ask her? Camila laughed, the sound sharp and cruel, slicing through the silence. Look at her. She's staring at the page like it's a math exam. A few diners stiffened. She probably can't even read the menu, Alessandro. It's pathetic. These places hire anyone off the street now. The restaurant went completely still. Forks hovered midair. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Alessandro shifted in his seat and looked at Sophie for the first time, really looked. The worn cuffs. The exhaustion in her eyes. The cheap shoes. Is that true? He asked quietly. Dangerously. Can you not read the menu? It was a trap. Say yes, and she was incompetent. Say no, and she was challenging a guest. Camila smirked, victory already written on her face. Of course she can't. Get so. Mion who knows what they're doing. Shoo. Sophie stood frozen. The insult burned, hot, sharp, humiliating. And that's when everything began to change. They thought humiliation would make her fold. They thought a sharp tone and a wine list were enough to remind her of her place. What they didn't realize was that the woman standing beside their table had survived far worse than condescension. And tonight, one careless assumption was about to detonate her entire life. The sickness that curled in Sophie Dubois's stomach wasn't caused by cruelty. She had learned to endure cruelty young. What cut deeper was the casual certainty that she was stupid. To them, she was just a waitress. Background noise. Disposable. A nobody carrying water instead of worth. They didn't see Sophie Dubois, former prodigy of the Sorbonne. They didn't see the daughter of a disgraced French diplomat who had once spent sun-soaked summers wandering the vineyards of Provence, learning soil and tannins before she was old enough to drive. They didn't see the girl whose life had collapsed when her father's gambling debts turned embassies into safe houses and Paris into something she could only remember. Sophie tightened her grip on the water pitcher until her knuckles whitened. She should walk away. She should fetch Lauren and let the moment pass like all the others. That was the rule. Survive quietly. But then she looked at Alessandro. He wasn't sneering the way Camila was. He wasn't amused or dismissive. He was watching her, closely. With a sharp, predatory focus. As if he were waiting. Measuring. Curious to see whether she would crumble or surprise him. Sophie inhaled slowly. She set the framed wine list down. The soft thud against the white tablecloth sounded louder than it should have. When she straightened, something shifted. The apologetic slouch vanished. Her shoulders squared. Her spine aligned. The waitress disappeared. Mademoiselle Paoli de Similon, Sophie said calmly. Her voice had changed. The hesitant American accent dissolved, replaced by crisp, melodic Parisian French, precise, educated, unmistakably native. Camila blinked, thrown off balance. What? She snapped. Sophie continued without looking at her. Her gaze locked onto Alessandro's as she spoke, her French flowing so effortlessly it sounded like music. She explained that the wine in question was a dry white, sharp with acidity, traditionally paired with oysters. It was certainly not a Bordeaux. If Monsieur was seeking the 1982, then you wanted Chateau Mouton Rothschild, page 14, third line from the bottom. Without hesitation, Sophie reached forward and flipped the heavy wine list with a single smooth motion. The pages fell open precisely where she said they would. Then she switched languages. In flawless, unaccented English, her tone cool and professional, she added that the vintage Camilla had been pointing at was corked. Kept on the list deliberately, she explained, as a trap for tourists. A test. Something she would never serve to a palate as refined as Mr. Moretti's. Silence followed. Not polite silence. Not awkward silence. The kind that presses on your ears. The kind that steals breath. Monsieur Laurent skidded to a halt mid-stride, his mouth hanging open as if he'd forgotten how to close it. Camilla's face flushed an alarming shade of red. "How dare you?" Camilla began. Alessandro raised one finger. She stopped instantly. Slowly, he lifted his gaze from the wine list to Sophie. The boredom that had dulled his expression moments earlier was gone. In its place was something sharper. Dangerous. Interest. "You speak French," Alessandro said. It wasn't a question. "I do," Sophie replied evenly, meeting his eyes. She already knew this would cost her job. For the first time, she didn't care. "And wine," he added. "I know that serving a muscadet with steak would be a crime against humanity, sir." The corner of Alessandro's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "What's your name?" "Sup." "Hi." He repeated it slowly, tasting the syllables as if it were whiskey. "You're not from Brooklyn, are you, Sophie?" "Everyone is from somewhere, Mr. Moretti," she said. "Right now, I'm simply from table 4. Alessandro studied her for a long, heavy moment. Then he closed the wine list. "Bring the Rothschild," he ordered, never breaking eye contact. "And another glass." Camilla brightened instantly. "Oh, Alessandro, you're too kind." "Not for you," he said flatly, cutting her off. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "The seat next to Camilla." "For her," he said, pointing at Sophie. "Sit." The restaurant gasped. A waitress dining with a don? It was unheard of. It was professional suicide. "Sir, I can't," Sophie stammered as adrenaline gave way to fear. "My shift, Lauren will fire me." Alessandro turned his head slightly toward the pale, trembling manager frozen a few feet away. "Lauren," he said calmly, "Sophie is finished with her shift. She's dining with me. Put it on my tab. And if she's fired, Le Noir burns by morning. Capice?" Lauren nodded so fast his glasses nearly slipped off. Yes, Mr. Moretti." "Of course." "Sophie, please." Sophie looked at the chair. Then at Camilla's furious, humiliated face. Then at the dark, abyssal eyes of Alessandro Moretti. She sat. That was the moment her old life ended. And the moment something far more dangerous began. The velvet chair was impossibly soft, luxurious in a way Sophie had never known, nothing like the splintered wooden stool in the break room where she usually ate stale bread. But she couldn't feel it. All she felt was Alessandro's gaze. Heavy. Physical. Like a hand around her throat. Across the table, Camilla Russo looked like she'd swallowed something sour. Her smile cracked, revealing raw, unfiltered rage beneath layers of makeup. "This is a joke," Camilla hissed. "A test? You're letting the help sit with us?" Alessandro didn't look at her. "Pour the wine, Sophie." Her hands trembled as she lifted the bottle. See. Chateau Mouton Rothschild, 1982. Worth more than 3 months of her rent. She decanted it with practiced precision, muscle memory from another life guiding her movements. She poured Alessandro a taste. He swirled the deep crimson liquid, inhaled, sipped. A nod. Sophie filled his glass. Then her own. She did not fill Camila's. "You're ignoring me." Camila shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. Silverware rattled. "I'm the daughter of Senator Russo. My father will." "Your father," Alessandro interrupted lazily, "owes me 3 favors and $4 million. If I told him I left you on the curb because you annoyed me, he'd apologize for the inconvenience." Camila went silent. "Sophie," Alessandro said, turning back to her, "tell me about the wine." She took a sip. The taste flooded her senses like memory, blackcurrant, cedar, cigar box. It tasted like her father's study before the raids. Before the fall. Before fear. It tasted like safety. "It's bold," Sophie said softly. "The structure is impeccable. The tannins have softened with age, but they still hold. Long finish. It survived." "A survivor," Alessandro repeated slowly, watching her. "Like you?" Sophie lowered her glass slowly, her fingers steady even as her pulse spiked. "I don't know what you mean, sir," she said, forcing calm into her voice. Camila let out a sharp, humorless scoff and pushed back her chair. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood, cutting through the hushed tension at the table. She stood, snatched up her clutch, her knuckles whitening as her grip tightened. "Please," she snapped. "I'm not staying for this charade." Her eyes flicked toward Sophie with open contempt. "You want to eat with the rat? Fine. Catch fleas." She turned to storm out, but stopped just long enough to grab her untouched glass of water. Her lips curled into a vindictive sneer as she flung the contents straight at Sophie. Time slowed. Sophie flinched, eyes squeezing shut, bracing for the cold shock against her face. It never came. She opened her eyes. Alessandro had moved faster than seemed possible. His arm was raised, his hand intercepting the arc of water midair. Droplets splashed across the sleeve of his tailored suit jacket and dripped onto the pristine white tablecloth below. His wine glass remained untouched. Not a drop spilled. The restaurant fell into complete silence. Even the clatter from the kitchen stopped, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Alessandro rose slowly from his chair. He slipped out of his damp jacket with deliberate calm and handed it to one of his granite-faced bodyguards without a word. Then he turned to Camila. "Leave," he said softly. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't even raised. It sounded final, like a coffin lid sealing shut. Camila's face drained of color as the realization hit her. She hadn't just insulted a man with influence. She had assaulted a capo. She didn't argue. She didn't look back. She turned and ran, her heels clicking wildly against the floor as she fled into the rain-soaked night. Alessandro sat back down as if nothing had happened. Without the jacket, he was left in a crisp white dress shirt, the fabric pulled taut across his broad shoulders. A gun holster was clearly visible beneath his left arm. He made no effort to conceal it. "My apologies," he said evenly to Sophie. "The trash has been taken out." Sophie stared at him, her heart still racing. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice barely steady. He cut into his steak with surgical precision. "Because you know the difference between a Muscadet and a Bordeaux," he replied casually. "And because you have the eyes of a woman who is running from something." He took a slow bite, chewing thoughtfully, then pointed his fork at her. "Eat. You look like you haven't had protein in a week." Her stomach betrayed her. The aroma of the ribeye was overwhelming. Sophie picked up her fork and took a bite, suppressing a sound that escaped before she could stop it. She hadn't realized how hungry she truly was. "So," Alessandro continued, swirling his wine. "Sophie. No last name. Perfect French. Deep knowledge of high-end vintages. Working a dead-end job under a manager who terrifies you." He leaned in, dark eyes narrowing. "Let me guess. Disgraced socialite?" She didn't respond. No, he went on. Too much steel in your spine. Runaway wife? He glanced at her hand. No ring mark. That leaves family trouble. Sophie froze. Her fork slipped from her fingers and clinked softly against the plate. I'm just a waitress, Mr. Moretti. Liar. He smiled, sharp and predatory, revealing perfect white teeth. You're Arthur Dubois's daughter. The glass slipped from her hand. It struck the table and shattered, red wine spilling outward. The expensive 1982 Rothschild soaked into the tablecloth, spreading like a gunshot wound. How? Sophie whispered, blood turning ice cold. How do you know that name? Your father was a legend, Alessandro said calmly, unfazed by the chaos of shattered crystal and staining wine. He gestured for a napkin. He moved art. Gems. Information. They called him the diplomat. His expression darkened. 3 years ago, he vanished with something valuable. Something that didn't belong to him. Something that belonged to the Moretti family. Sophie shoved her chair back, panic clawing at her throat. I don't know where he is. I haven't seen him in 3 years. Please, I just want to go home. You can't, Alessandro said quietly. Why not? Because if I found you, he said, nodding toward the rain-streaked window where dark SUVs idled, then Stefano Greco found you too. His voice dropped. And unlike me, Greco doesn't like wine. He likes blood. On cue, the front window of Laval Noir exploded inward. The sound wasn't a crash, it was a violent detonation. Glass erupted across the dining room like a storm of diamonds. Screams filled the air. Chairs overturned. Diners dove beneath tables. Sophie didn't have time to scream. A power few. L-force slammed into her, knocking her backward as her chair toppled. Alessandro was on top of her instantly, shielding her with his body. She felt the solid heat of his chest, smelled gunpowder mixed with expensive cologne. Pop, 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 pop. Bullets shredded the velvet booth where they'd been sitting seconds earlier. Bottles behind the bar exploded, raining liquor and glass over the bartender crouched below. Stay down. Alessandro roared. He drew his pistol in one smooth motion, firing 3 precise shots toward the shattered window. Dante. The back. One of the bodyguards was already moving, flipping a table for cover and returning fire. Sophie shook uncontrollably. Who are they? Greco, Alessandro snarled. He looked down at her, blood streaking his cheek from flying glass. He wants you. He thinks you have the key. The key to what? She cried. I don't have anything. We move. Now. He yanked her up, keeping her low as they ran for the kitchen. They burst through the swinging doors, startling the chefs. Out the back. Alessandro ordered. No one argued. They tore through steam and grease, bursting into the rain-soaked alley. A black armored SUV screeched to a halt. Get in. Alessandro shoved her inside and dove in after her. The tires screamed as the vehicle tore away, just as a motorcycle appeared, its rider raising a submachine gun. Bullets pinged uselessly off the reinforced glass as the SUV vanished into the night. The SUV cut through the rain like a bullet through darkness, carrying the last survivors of a night that should have killed them both. Sophie didn't know where the shaking ended and the cold began. All she knew was that moments ago, people had been shooting at her, and now she was trapped in a moving box with the most dangerous man she had ever met. She sat curled into the corner of the leather seat, knees pulled tight to her chest. Her clothes were soaked through, her teeth chattered uncontrollably, and her mind lagged behind reality, till replaying the sound of gunfire. The smell of rain, gunpowder, and leather hung thick in the air. Across from her, Eliandro sat with infuriating composure. He slid his gun back into its holster, smoothed the cuffs of his suit, and adjusted his watch as if he'd just stepped out of a dull boardroom meeting instead of a violent ambush. His breathing was steady. His expression unreadable. Are you hit? He asked calmly. Sophie blinked, startled by the normalcy of the question. She ran trembling hands over her arms, her sides, her legs. No blood. No pain beyond the shock. No. I don't think so. Then she looked at him properly. You're bleeding. Alejandro reached up and touched his cheek. When he pulled his fingers away, they came back streaked with red. He studied it for half a second, unimpressed. It's nothing. He popped open a compartment in the armrest and pulled out a bottle of water and a clean towel, tossing them toward her. Clean up, he said. You look like a ghost. Her hands shook as she wiped rain and grime from her face. The towel came away gray. Her voice cracked as the fear she'd been holding back finally spilled out. You said they want the key. What key? She swallowed hard. My father left us with nothing. Just debt. We lost the vineyard. The flat in Paris. Everything. I've been waiting tables for 2 years just to keep a roof over my head. Alejandro watched her closely as she spoke, his gaze sharp and surgical. He wasn't just listening, he was dissecting every micro-expression, every flicker of emotion. Years in the underworld had trained him to spot lies in a heartbeat. He saw fear. Confusion. Bone-deep exhaustion. He did not see deception. Arthur didn't just steal money, Sophie, he said evenly. He stole a ledger. An encrypted drive with routing numbers for every offshore account tied to the East Coast Syndicate. Her breath caught. Greco wants it so he can take the city, Alejandro continued. I wanted to stop him. I don't ha. It, Sophie insisted, desperation flooding her voice. Maybe not knowingly, Alejandro replied. But Arthur was a sentimental fool. He would have hidden it close to you. Somewhere safe. The SUV slowed. Sophie glanced out the window and felt a jolt of panic. The skyline had changed. They weren't in Manhattan anymore. The streets were wider, darker. Industrial shadows loomed as they crossed a bridge toward the docks. But then the car turned, away from the warehouses, and veered toward a solitary high-rise standing over the river like a silent sentinel. Where are we going? Sophie asked. My place, Alejandro said. No panic surged through her. Take me to my apartment. I need my things. My mother's locket is there. Alejandro exhaled, irritated but controlled. He tapped the partition. Driver. Detour to Queens. 42nd Street. Sir, it's not safe, the thick-necked driver warned. Do it, Alejandro said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The rest of the drive passed in heavy silence. When the SUV finally stopped, Sophie stared at her building, a crumbling brick tenement with peeling paint and rusted fire escapes. It looked smaller than she remembered. More fragile. Alejandro motioned for his men to stay back. I'm coming up with you. I can pack my own bag, Sophie snapped, clinging to the last shred of dignity she had left. Sophie, Alejandro said quietly, his voice dropping. Look at your door. She followed his gaze to the second-floor window. The light was on. Her stomach dropped. She never left the light on. She bolted from the car. Sophie, you wait. Alejandro cursed and ran after her as she tore up the stairs 2 at a time. She reached her floor and froze. The lock was destroyed. The doorframe splintered, wood ripped apart like it had been kicked in by force. She pushed the door open. The scream never made it out. The apartment had been annihilated. Her mattress lay ripped open, stuffing spilling out like exposed organs. The dresser was smashed. Clothes printed and thrown everywhere. Floorboards pried up. Wallpaper peeled back. Her life had been searched, stripped, and violated. No, she whispered, collapsing to her knees. No, no, no. She crawled through the wreckage, hands shaking as she reached beneath the broken bed, searching for the loose floorboard she'd used as a hiding place. Empty. The locket, she sobbed. They took the locket. It had the only picture of my mother. Alejandro stepped inside, surveying the destruction with cold precision. He recognized the signature immediately. Greco. Messy. Violent. Deliberate. He crossed the room and crouched beside Sophie, his expensive suit brushing the filthy floor. He didn't offer false comfort. He didn't lie. He lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. They didn't find what they were looking for, he said. They took everything, Sophie cried. They took trash and trinkets, Alejandro corrected. If they'd found the drive, they would have burned this building down. They're still hunting. He stood and extended his hand. You have nothing left here, Sophie. No job. No home. No past. She stared at his hand. Strong. Scarred. Steady. The hand of a killer. But it was the only thing in the room that wasn't broken. Come with me, Alejandro said. I'll get your locket back. I'll settle your father's debt. But you belong with me now. Belong, she whispered. Like a possession. Like a partner, he corrected. I need your mind. You need my protection until Greco is dead. You are Sophie Moretti. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. Sophie hesitated. Then she placed her hand in his. He pulled her up, drew her close, and for the first time that night, she felt safe. Let's go home, he said. The penthouse was not a home. It was a fortress in the sky. The elevator opened directly into a vast living space larger than Sophie's entire building. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls revealed Manhattan glittering below. The furniture was modern, Italian, stark, black. White, chrome. Beautiful. Cold. Masculine. Dante, Alejandro called. Secure the perimeter. Double the lobby guard. No one comes up without my approval. Get the chef. And a doctor. I don't need a doctor, Sophie murmured, hugging herself. Her waitress uniform was stained with wine and dust. She felt painfully out of place. You have cuts from the glass, Alejandro said, loosening his tie. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid and handed one to her. Brandy. Drink. She did. It burned, but it grounded her. There's a guest room down the hall, Alejandro said. And for the first time, Sophie realized this was no longer a temporary escape. This was the beginning of something dangerous. She had been given a choice, but not a real one. Run into the dark and become prey, or stay and step deeper into a world ruled by power. Sophie didn't yet know it, but the decision she was about to make would pull her straight toward the truth about her father, and the man who had stolen 3 years of his life. Alessandro gestured casually toward the adjoining room, as if he were offering her a glass of water instead of control over her fate. There are clothes in the closet, he said. My sister's old things. She keeps them here. They should fit. Shower, change, then come to my study. And if I refuse? Sophie asked. Her chin lifted, a spark of defiance clawing its way back through the exhaustion. Alessandro paused mid-step. He turned slowly, fixing her with that piercing gaze that made her knees weaken despite herself. The door is unlocked, Sophie, he said evenly. You can leave whenever you want. But out there, you are prey. He let the words settle before adding, quieter now, and here, you are a guest. Choose. Then he turned away, disappearing through a set of heavy double doors, leaving Sophie alone in the vast, echoing room. She stared at the elevator. She could run. She could go straight to the police. But she already knew the truth. Her father had taught her that lesson long ago. There is no law, Arthur used to say. Only power. And power, she suspected, had already been bought. Slowly, reluctantly, Sophie turned toward the guest room. The shower came down like a waterfall, steaming hot, relentless. It stripped away the grease of the restaurant, the dust of her destroyed apartment, the fear clinging to her skin. She scrubbed until her skin turned pink, until the night felt distant, almost unreal. When she stepped out, a row of clothes waited exactly where Alessandro had said they would be. Silk blouses. Cashmere sweaters. Things that spoke of wealth she'd never touched. She chose a simple oversized white shirt and black leggings. No armor. No disguise. In the mirror, the girl staring back at her looked different. Harder. Sharper around the eyes. She walked to the study. The doors were already open. The room was lined floor to ceiling with books, old volumes, leather-bound spines, knowledge gathered like weapons. Alessandro sat behind a massive mahogany desk, surrounded by glowing monitors and towering stacks of paper. He had changed into a fitted black t-shirt, revealing muscular arms covered in intricate tattoos, vines and thorns twisting around his biceps like living ink. Better, he said, not looking up from the document in his hands. You said you needed my brain, Sophie replied, stopping in front of the desk. I assume you don't need me to recite wine vintages. Alessandro slid a piece of paper toward her. It was old. Yellowed. Covered in dense, handwritten cipher. This is a letter your father sent me 3 days before he vanished, Alessandro said. We intercepted it, but never cracked it. My cryptographers say it's gibberish. Random French poetry. Sophie picked it up, her breath catching instantly. She knew the handwriting. The looping L's. The sharp T's. It's not random, she whispered. Read it. Alessandro leaned back. Then explain it. Sophie scanned the text, her mind moving faster with every word. The moonlight shines on the forgotten vineyard where the fox sleeps under the 9th stone. We know what it says in English, Alessandro snapped. But it means nothing. There is no vineyard. No fox. It's a book code, Sophie said, suddenly certain. Memories flooded back, childhood nights, her father reading aloud. My father used stories. The Little Prince. Les Miserables. But this, she tapped the paper, the fox refers to Aesop's Fables. The 1890 edition. He had a first edition in his library. Alessandro stood abruptly. And the 9th stone? Page 9. Or the 9th fable, Sophie said. The fox and the grapes. She looked up at him, realization settling like a weight. He wasn't telling you where. The money was. He was telling you where the key is. Where? Alessandro demanded, leaning over the desk. The forgotten vineyard, Sophie murmured. Her eyes closed. When I was 10, we buried a time capsule in the old vineyard in Provence. Before we lost the estate. We buried it under the 9th stone of the garden wall. Alessandro's eyes widened. Provence. The drive is in France. If he didn't move it, Sophie said quietly, it's still there. Then we go, Alessandro said instantly. He slammed a button on his desk phone. Dante. Prep the jet. We leave for Marseilles in 1 hour. Wait. Sophie cried. I'm not going to France with you. I'm wanted by French authorities for my father's debts. Alessandro rounded the desk, stopping inches from her. The air between them crackled. I own French customs at Marseilles, he said. You won't be arrested. But you are the only one who can find that stone. You are the only one who knows the estate. He reached out, gently tucking a wet strand of hair behind her ear. The softness of the gesture clashed violently with the night's brutality. Help me find the drive, Sophie. Help me destroy Greco, and I'll give you your life back. I'll clear your debts. I'll buy you Lieto Noir if you want it. I don't want the restaurant, Sophie whispered. I want my father. Alessandro's expression darkened. He looked away, for just a second. Enough for Sophie to notice. What? She demanded. What aren't you telling me? Her voice broke. Is he dead? He grabbed her shoulders. He's not dead. But he isn't missing either. He didn't run. Then where is he? Alessandro exhaled. He's in the dungeon of Stefano Greco's villa in Tuscany. He's been there for 3 years. Sophie's world tilted. The letter. It wasn't sent before he vanished, Alessandro said. It was smuggled out last week. He's alive, Sophie breathed. And you knew? I suspected, Alessandro admitted. The letter confirmed it. Then forget the drive. Sophie shouted. We save him. We can't, Alessandro roared back. Not without the drive. Greco is holding him for the codes. If we storm the villa, he kills Arthur. If we give him the drive, he kills Arthur. The only way is to bankrupt him first. Freeze his accounts. Strip his army away. Sophie stood frozen, chest heaving. The stakes had exploded beyond money. Beyond survival. It was her father's life. She looked at the man before her, the Mafia Don. The monster. Her only hope. France, Sophie said at last. We go to France. Alessandro nodded once. Get your coat. As she turned to leave, Sophie's eyes caught a file on the corner of his desk, half open. A photograph clipped to the front. And for the first time that night, she felt truly afraid. She recognized the photo instantly. It had been taken from across the street, grainy, zoomed in, unmistakable. Lito Noir. 2 weeks ago. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization slammed into her all at once, freezing her where she stood. You knew, Sophie whispered. She turned back to Alessandro, betrayal burning behind her eyes. The truth finally snapped into focus, sharp and unforgiving. You didn't come to the restaurant for dinner, she said, her voice trembling. You came for me. Alessandro didn't deny it. He stood there in silence, tall and immovable, the glow of the city stretching behind him like a curtain of shadows. I came to see, he said evenly, whether Arthur Dubois's daughter was worth the trouble. The words hit hard. Sophie swallowed, tears rising despite her effort to hold them back. And, she challenged. Am I? Alessandro closed the distance between them. He stopped only when his chest brushed hers, his presence overwhelming, inescapable. He looked down at her, his dark eyes lit with something fierce, possessive, dangerous, and unmistakably real. Read the menu, Sophie, he murmured, repeating the words from earlier that night. Then, more quietly, his voice rough with intensity, he added, You are worth it. The moment burned itself into her memory. The private jet touched down on a secluded airstrip outside Marseille just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon, washing the countryside in bruised purples and muted gold. The landing was smooth, almost too quiet, like the calm before a storm. They barely spoke during the flight. Alessandro spent most of the time on his encrypted satellite phone, issuing sharp commands in Italian, orders to his men in New York, instructions to a strike team repositioning in Tuscany. His tone never wavered. Controlled. Lethal. Sophie sat by the window, twisting the fabric of borrowed leggings between her fingers, staring out at the clouds as memories collided violently in her mind. A dusty Peugeot rental car waited for them on the tarmac. Alessandro drove. He handled the winding roads the same way he handled everything else, with precision and unapologetic confidence. Cypress trees lined the narrow route, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. After nearly an hour, Sophie leaned forward. We're close, she said quietly. Turn left at the next crossroads. The pavement ends there. They turned onto a gravel track. The tires crunched loudly beneath them. A weathered sign, half swallowed by ivy, came into view. Chateau Dubois. The estate was a ghost. The once grand manor of warm yellow stone stood boarded and sagging, its roof caved inward by time and neglect. But it was the vineyard that hurt the most. What had once produced award-winning wine was now wild and suffocating, vines twisted into thorny chaos, the soil choked and forgotten. Stop here, Sophie whispered. We have to walk. The engine noise will carry. Alessandro shut off the car. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a duffel bag, then handed Sophie a flashlight while keeping one hand close to his holster. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "If you see anyone, you drop to the ground. Don't scream. Don't run. Understand?" Sophie stepped out into the cool morning air. The scent of wild thyme and damp earth hit her all at once, tightening her chest. "I grew up playing hide-and-seek in these rows, Alessandro," she said softly. "I know how to disappear here." They moved carefully through the overgrown vines, the silence heavy and watchful. Dry leaves crunched under their boots, the sound painfully loud in the stillness. "The garden wall is on the north side," Sophie said, guiding him. They reached the old stone boundary wall, moss clinging to every surface. Sophie knelt, counting stones with shaking breath. 1, 2, 3, here. She pointed to a flat river stone near the base, the ninth. Alessandro crouched, drew a knife from his boot, and wedged it beneath the stone. With a strained grunt, he levered it free. Beneath it sat a rusted tin box. A biscuit tin. Sophie dropped to her knees and grabbed it, her hands trembling so violently she couldn't open it. Alessandro covered her hands with his own. "Let me." He popped the lid. The smell of stale paper drifted upward. Inside lay fragments of a life long buried, childhood trinkets, a dried flower, a toy soldier, a crude drawing of a horse. And taped to the bottom, a silver USB drive. "He did it," Sophie whispered, tears spilling freely now. "He really hid it here." "Secure it," Alessandro said sharply, scanning the tree line. "We have what we need." Then, click. The sound was unmistakable. A hammer being cocked. "Don't move," a voice sneered from within the vines. "And drop the gun, Moretti. Unless you want the girl's brains fertilizing the grapes." Alessandro went rigid. Slowly, he raised his hands. 3 men stepped out of the shadows. Their leader was massive, a slab of muscle with a scar slicing through his left eyebrow. A suppressed MP5 was aimed directly at Sophie's chest. "Luca," Alessandro said calmly, almost bored. "Greco finally let you off your leash." Luca grinned. "He knew you'd come for the girl's heritage. Hand over the drive." "And if I don't?" Alessandro asked. "And I kill her, take it anyway, and leave you for the crows." Alessandro looked at Sophie. His eyes locked onto hers. "Trust me." "Fine," he said. He reached into the tin, lifted the silver drive, and held it up as dawn light glinted off its surface. "You want it," he said. "Catch." He hurled it high into the air toward a dense thicket of thorns. Luca's eyes followed it instinctively. That fraction of a second was enough. Alessandro tackled Sophie behind the stone wall just as gunfire erupted. Bullets shattered stone inches above their heads. "Stay down," Alessandro roared. He rolled onto his back, drew his pistol in one fluid motion, and fired blindly over the wall. A scream echoed through the vineyard as one of the men dropped. "Get to the vines," Alessandro shouted, dragging Sophie into thick cover. They crawled through dirt and tangled roots, thorns ripping at Sophie's skin as heavy footsteps thundered behind them. "Spread out. Find them," Luca shouted. "The drive," Sophie hissed, panic rising. "You threw it away." "I threw the toy soldier," Alessandro snapped, reloading as they crouched behind a gnarled trunk. He tapped his chest pocket. "The real one's right here." Sophie stared at him, breathless. "You're insane." "I'm practical," he replied evenly. "Now listen." They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded, and Alessandro knew it before the first bullet ever flew. This was the moment where plans stopped matching and instinct took over. One wrong move, 1 second of hesitation, and neither of them would leave the vineyard alive. "I'll draw their fire," Alessandro said low and fast. "You run for the car. Don't look back." "No." Sophie grabbed his arm with both hands, her fingers digging in. "I'm not leaving you." He looked at her then, really looked at her. And for a heartbeat, the ruthless calm he wore like armor cracked. Beneath it was a man terrified of losing the one thing he had only just allowed himself to care about. Sophie, please. Gunfire snap. Pit again, closer this time. They're moving left, Sophie whispered. Her voice was steady, but her senses were razor-sharp, tuned to the land she knew by heart. She pointed into the darkness. There's an old irrigation ditch, 10 yards that way. It runs straight back to the road. We can both make it. Alessandro followed her gaze, then looked back at her. A fierce grin cut through the tension, sharp and electric. Lead the way, mademoiselle. They moved as one, no hesitation, no argument. They dropped into the ditch just as bullets tore through the grapevines where they'd been standing seconds earlier. Dirt exploded. Leaves shredded. They ran crouched low, lungs burning, legs screaming, the night alive with gunfire behind them. Then the car appeared. Alessandro vaulted into the driver's seat. Sophie slammed into the passenger side. He twisted the wheel hard, gravel spraying as the engine roared to life. A figure burst from the tree line, Luca, firing wildly. The rear windshield shattered in a violent spray of glass. Sophie screamed and ducked as Alessandro slammed the car into gear and floored it. The Peugeot tore down the dirt track, leaving chaos and gunfire behind. Are you hit? Alessandro shouted over the wind ripping through the broken window. No. Sophie checked herself quickly. Blood streaked her arms from thorn scratches, but there were no bullet wounds. She turned to him. Alessandro was grinning, wild, feral, high on adrenaline. You did good, Sophie, he laughed. Very good. She stared at him, heart still racing. Dangerous. Lethal. And somehow, the most exhilarating man she had ever known. To Tuscany, she asked, forcing her voice steady. His grin vanished, replaced by something cold and focused. To Tuscany, Alessandro said. To kill a monster. Stefano Greco's villa rose from the rolling Tuscan hills like a relic of old power, beautiful, ancient, and rotten to its core. A fortress built on blood money and buried secrets. Night had fallen by time they arrived. This time, there was no sneaking in. They drove straight up to the front gates in a black Mercedes provided by Alessandro's contacts. He wore a fresh suit, black on black, immaculate and controlled. Sophie stepped out in a red silk gown, nothing like the cheap uniform from Lito Noir. The dress fit her like royalty. She looked like a queen. She felt like a sacrifice. Remember the plan, Alessandro murmured as the iron gates groaned open. You're the leverage. I'm the buyer. We show no fear. I'm not afraid, Sophie lied. Good, he replied quietly. Because Greco feeds on fear. Armed guards escorted them into the main hall, a vast, echoing chamber filled with priceless Renaissance art and the faint, unmistakable scent of sulfur. Stefano Greco waited at the head of a long banquet table. Small. Oily. Dead eyes. A smile that showed too many gums. And the little waitress, Greco said, spreading his arms. Welcome. I trust the journey was comfortable. Enough, Alessandro cut in. He didn't sit. He stood behind Sophie's chair, one hand resting firmly on her shoulder. We have the drive. Do you? Greco lifted his glass. Show me. Alessandro placed a silver USB on the table. Arthur Dubois. Greco snapped his fingers. A side door opened. 2 guards dragged a man inside. Sophie gasped. Papa. Arthur Dubois barely looked human anymore, gaunt, bruised, one eye swollen shut. He stumbled, barely able to stand. Sophie, he croaked. No, run. Let him go. Sophie demanded, starting to rise. Alessandro's grip tightened, holding her in place. The drive first, Greco said calmly. He plugged it into a laptop. Typed. scowled. It's encrypted, he spat. Biometric. Voice recognition. His eyes slid to Sophie. Clever, Arthur. You made your daughter the password. She'll unlock it, Alessandro said. After Arthur is in the car. Greco laughed, dry and hollow. You don't bargain here, boy. He pulled a gun from beneath the table and pressed it to Art. Hers head. Unlock it, Sophie. Or Daddy paints the wall. No. Sophie screamed. Do it, Greco snarled, cocking the hammer. Sophie looked at Alessandro. His face was stone, unreadable, but his hand squeezed her shoulder twice. A signal. She stood and walked to the laptop, every guard watching her. The screen prompted for a voice phrase. Sophie met Greco's eyes. You want the code? She asked. I want the world, Greco smiled. Give it to me. She leaned into the microphone. The fox knows many tricks, she said in French, but the hedgehog knows one big one. Green flashed. Access granted. Files spilled across the screen, accounts, routing numbers, the blueprint of the entire syndicate. Greco's eyes lit with greed. Yes, it's all here. He looked up. Kill them. A deal is a deal, Alessandro growled. I don't make deals, Greco laughed. I make corpses. So do I, Alessandro said. And the lights went out. Total darkness. Chaos erupted. Alessandro moved before the power fully died, the blackout triggered by a remote in his pocket, timed to Sophie's words. Gunfire exploded in the dark as he tackled Sophie, shielding her body while firing 3 precise shots toward Greco's guards. The reckoning had begun. He could see in the dark. They couldn't. That single advantage turned the room into a nightmare. Get Arthur. Alessandro roared, his voice cutting through the chaos as gunfire echoed and furniture splintered around them. Sophie was already on the floor, her knees scraping against shattered glass as she crawled toward where her father had collapsed. Smoke burned her lungs. The air smelled like cordite and overturned wine. Papa, Papa, her voice broke as she reached him. Arthur's hand found hers, thin, trembling, but still warm. I've got you, Sophie, he rasped, fighting for breath. Go. She shook her head fiercely. Not without you. That was when the emergency lights flickered to life. The villa was suddenly drenched in dim red illumination, every shadow stretched long and cruel, the walls painted the color of spilled blood. In that glow, Alessandro became something else entirely. He moved like a storm. 2 guards rushed him at once. He disarmed the first with a sharp, brutal motion, spinning the man into the line of fire. The second guard barely had time to react before Alessandro cleared the path with ruthless precision. But it was already too late. Greco was gone. The laptop was gone. He ran. Alessandro shouted. Take your father to the car. Dante's waiting at the back gate. Sophie struggled to lift Arthur, her arms shaking as adrenaline carried her strength farther than fear ever could. Where are you going? She screamed. To finish it. Alessandro didn't look back. He turned and sprinted toward the side door. Sophie dragged her father through the wreckage, overturned tables, shattered glass, bodies she refused to look at. They burst into the courtyard just as gunfire cracked from behind them. The Mercedes waited with its engine running. Dante stood by the door, firing controlled cover shots into the villa. Get in, he yelled. Sophie shoved her father into the back seat. But she didn't follow. At the sound of another gunshot, she turned toward the villa, hard hammering against her ribs. Go! She slammed the door shut. Get him to safety. Sophie, no. Arthur shouted from inside the car. Drive, Sophie ordered. The tires screeched as the Mercedes tore away. And Sophie ran back inside. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was a woman in love with a king, and she refused to let him die alone. She found them in the library. Greco was crouched behind a massive oak desk, clutching the laptop like a lifeline. Alessandro was pinned behind a marble pillar, his movements slower now, his magazine nearly empty. "It's over, Alessandro," Greco shouted, panic cracking through his triumph. "I have the accounts. I'm transferring everything right now. You have nothing." Sophie saw it then, Greco's finger H, hovering over the enter key. She scanned the room desperately. And she saw it. A heavy bronze bust of Julius Caesar sat on a high shelf above Greco's head. The shelf was held up by a single wooden bracket. Sophie didn't have a gun. She had a wine bottle. A thick, heavy magnum she'd grabbed from the banquet table without thinking. She didn't aim for Greco. She aimed for the bracket. The bottle flew from her hands and exploded against the wood. The bracket snapped instantly. The bronze bust plunged downward, smashing into Greco's arm with a sickening crunch. He screamed. The laptop hit the floor. The gun skidded away. Alessandro stepped out from behind the pillar. He didn't hesitate. One shot. One final sound. Stefano Greco slumped forward, the room falling into stunned silence. Alessandro stood there, chest heaving. He looked at the body. Then at the laptop. Then at Sophie, standing in the doorway, her red dress torn, her hands empty, her eyes blazing. He crossed the room and took her face in his hands. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't polite. It was raw, full of survival, adrenaline, blood, and victory. A kiss that said we're still alive. He rested his forehead against hers. "I told you to get in the car," he whispered. "I don't take orders," Sophie replied. He smirked faintly. "Well," she added softly, "I'm French." Alessandro laughed, breathless. Then his eyes shifted to the laptop. "He didn't transfer the money, did he?" "No," Alessandro said calmly. "The code you gave him didn't unlock anything. It uploaded a virus. Wiped every server he owned." He paused. "He died broke." Sophie smiled. "The hedgehog knows one big trick." Alessandro scooped her up despite her protests. "Let's go home, Sophie. I'm starving." 6 months later, the rain in Manhattan was gentle. Inside Lito Noir, the energy buzzed with new life. The restaurant gleamed under fresh leadership. Sophie moved through the dining room, not as staff, but as the owner. Her suit was tailored, her pose too. Confident, her presence undeniable. At table 4, Arthur Dubois sat upright and healthy, sipping tea and reading the paper. "The inventory's done, Papa," Sophie said, kissing his cheek. "Good," he smiled. "Go. He's waiting." She walked to the private booth. Alessandro Moretti sat there, not in a suit, but in a soft sweater. The weight in his eyes had lifted. Warmth had taken its place. A bottle of wine rested between them. Chateau Mouton Rothschild, 1982, Sophie noted. "Bold." "I'm celebrating," Alessandro said. "What are we celebrating?" He reached into his pocket. Not a gun. Not a drive. A velvet box. "I finally found someone who can read the menu," he said with a grin. "And I don't intend to let her dine alone again." Sophie steadied the box. Then his face. "Is that a command, Mr. Moretti?" "It's a proposal." She smiled, the same smile that once brought an empire to its knees. She lifted her wine glass. "Then pour the wine, Alessandro. We have a lot to discuss." And that is how Sophie Dubois went from the invisible girl at table 4 to the queen of the New York underworld. She proved that power isn't about guns or muscle, it's about intelligence, courage, and knowing exactly which wine to pair with revenge. Alessandro Moretti thought he saved her. In the end, she was the one who saved him. If you love this story of danger, romance, and justice, hit the like button. It truly helps the channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story.